the NSE5 journey. We're going to continue with the last section of the system settings for the FortiManager. As always, if you wanted to contact me, you can do that via here, via YouTube, LinkedIn or Twitter. Where are we? We're at the last video within the second section of the FortiManager, the system settings. The previous video we talked about the admin profiles and the types of administrator profiles you can create and creating the administrator accounts themselves, along with the centralized authentication methods. In this video we're going to discuss a bit more about concurrent ADOM access and how you can lock down the ADOM using workflow methods. So let's get started. So the problem we got with our ADOM access is if we have multiple engineers, by default they can all log on and make changes at the same time. The problem with that is it can cause conflicts. If an engineer logs in and goes to a particular ADOM to maybe modify a policy or change a particular VLAN, there's nothing stopping another engineer at the same time to maybe delete that VLAN or change it to something else. And we need some sort of method to resolve this. Now there are a few ways to do it, and we're going to go through what methods we have at our disposal and how we can enable them and configure them within the FortiManager. Personally, I don't understand why this isn't a default within the FortiManager, but I'm sure there might be an underlying reason for that. The first of these methods is the workspace mode. The workspace mode is the standard method. It essentially allows us to lock an ADOM before we want to make any changes to that ADOM. So as an engineer, I would log onto the FortiManager, I would lock that ADOM down. Once the ADOM is locked, it would show as locked to other engineers, and no other engineers can log on whilst I've locked that ADOM. I will make the changes that I require, and once I'm happy and they've been applied to the FortiGate, I would then have to unlock the ADOM to free it up for another engineer to make changes. This particular change, the workspace mode, can only be done via the CLI. What we'll do is we'll log into the CLI of the FortiManager and we'll enable it, and then we're going to log into the GUI and have a look at what changes and effects that has. Okay, here we are. We're actually just logging into the FortiManager. Once logged in, we're going to go to the configuration, system, global. We're going to set the workspace mode. If we question mark, we have a few options. We have disabled, which is the default. We have normal, which is what we're going to configure now, and we have something called workflow, which we'll pick up a bit later in the lesson. Once it's been set, we're going to end. Okay, now here we are back to the GUI of the FortiManager. We're going to log on using my credentials. Now you'll notice at the top left hand corner we've got this new button, the lock ADOM. Now earlier we created the test1 ADOM. Now if I was an engineer and I wanted to modify this particular ADOM, what I'll need to do first is actually lock it. Once it's locked, it becomes green to say that I've locked it. To anyone else it would show as red to show that another engineer has locked it. And if I was to unlock it, I would simply press the unlock button again and it is free. During that locked phase, only I can make changes to that device. No one else can. And you can see up here it says it was locked by the admin. Once the engineer has locked the ADOM and he's made the required changes, what you will need to do is save those changes before you go ahead and install them onto the device. In our next section, I want to talk about the workflows mode. We've already had a discussion around normal mode, which introduces a method of locking an ADOM to combat concurrent ADOM access, whereby multiple administrators could log on to the particular ADOM and make the change at the same time. The workflow element builds further onto that method. So the locking element is still there, great. However, what this allows the FortiManager to control is whether or not that particular person locking that ADOM is allowed to approve and make those changes, or whether it requires a senior engineer or the service provider to approve and reject or check those changes before they're actually applied to the device. It's applied on the FortiManager via the CLI, just like the normal mode. Instead, we use the keyword workflow instead of normal within the set workspace-mode underneath the config system global command, and we're going to jump into the CLI of the FortiManager and make that change. Once we switch it to the workflow, we need to have a think about our permissions. Who do we want to actually create these sessions, and further to that, who do we want to approve those sessions? Can someone approve it for themselves, or does it require a senior or a service provider to be approved? Now there are two elements to this. Not only do we have to make sure our admin profiles have the right permissions to create those sessions, we need to make sure that if we're going down the route of workflows, every ADOM has a admin or a senior engineer to approve. Otherwise you can't create those sessions. So what we're going to do is jump into the FortiManager, first the CLI and get the mode enabled and set the permissions, and then into the GUI and we'll create some. Okay, here we are into the CLI of the FortiManager, and we're going to enable the workflow mode within the workspaces. So the way to do this, we're going to go into the config system global. I'm going to say set workspace -mode. Normally we have the normal mode, which will enable us to lock the session before we make the changes. However, in this instance we're going to go with the workflow mode. Sometimes you'll get a warning message depending on which mode the FortiManager is in. The warning message will come up advising if you were to make the change to the workspace, it may kick out users that are logged into it. So in a production environment, you're normally going to have some sort of change control in place, or engineers to be aware that you're going to make these changes so they don't lose any configuration. Once it's changed to the workflow mode, we need to think about the permissions and how those permissions are going to look. Who's actually able to approve the changes that we want to put forward, and we need to do this based on administrative profiles. So for example, if we look at the config system admin profile, edit and look at the list of profiles, you can see we have the standard profiles and two new ones that I've created at the bottom. Bob's profile is one I created offline, and essentially it's applied to our user Bob. The Bob's profile only allows them, or allows him, to view the policy tab. I've taken away device management, the FortiGuard tab and the system settings. Okay, if we remember in our scenario, Bob is a user, an admin user within the ADOM test. Okay, so what I've done is I've said to Bob that he can have access to create his own policies. Maybe he wants to block particular IPs, allow particular protocols, so his access has been locked down to what he requires. So we're going to edit Bob, and we're going to set his workflow approve to read-write. Now what this will allow Bob to do is to log into the FortiManager and to create a session. Within that session, he may want to add as many policies, as many objects, address or security profiles as he would like. Once he's happy with the changes, he can save those changes. Once they're saved, they'll actually get automatically emailed to an administrator, whether that's the supplier or whether it's someone higher up within the test company that we put together, and they will need to review and approve or reject or delete the changes that Bob has proposed onto the FortiGate before those changes can be installed. So what we're going to do now is going to log into the FortiManager, and we're going to have a look at creating some changes and then logging in as the admin account and then approving those changes. Okay, so here we are back at the GUI, and we're actually going to log on with Bob. So once we log in with Bob, first of all you'll notice that the display is a little bit different. he only has the policy and objects. Like I explained, his profile has been locked down, so he only has visibility of that object within this ADOM. So if Bob wants to make a change now, he would go to session list, and straight away you'll see we have an error. And the error is basically advising us you can't make any changes to this particular ADOM because there's no one set up to approve it. So what we're going to need to do first is set that up. So let's log out and let's log in with the admin credentials. To set up an approver, what we're going to do is go to the system settings, and you'll notice under admin there's a new section called workflow approval, and this is being created once we enabled the workflows. We're going to create new. What particular ADOM are we interested in? We're interested in test 1. Who do we want to approve it? In this case, we're going to allow the admin. You can also set up to send email notifications to a particular email address using an email server that you've created on this FortiManager. Let's click OK there. If you wanted to create an email server, pretty straightforward. Under the advanced, within the system settings, there's the mail server. If we click this, click new, we put in the simple mail transfer server name, the mail server, the port, and whether it requires authentication. Once that's been populated, we can actually go back into the workflow approver, go within the account here, and add it as a drop down. For now, we're not going to bother with that. What this will essentially do is when Bob or someone makes a change to the ADOM test 1, the approver, in this case admin, will get an email notification to advise a change is outstanding. So now we've set up that, what we're going to do is log out, and we're going to log back in as Bob, and then we're going to go ahead and create some random change on the policies. So now what you'll find is when I go up to create a session, I shouldn't receive that error because an approver has been set up. So there you go. Now what we're going to do would help if you lock the ADOM. So previously, as I said, you have to lock the ADOM before changes can be made. In this case, it's smart enough to know that once we lock it, we're obviously going to make some sort of change, and it wants us to create a new session. So let's create a session. Let's give it some sort of identification. Here, for example, we can maybe put in a change control number so it's easy to track the change, and maybe you have some sort of internal system processes that you follow that require the changes to be tracked. For now, let's just pretend we do, and the change control is 5589. The comments is a new policy for protocol X. Let's press OK. Now what we have is something very similar to the FortiGates. Is essentially these are the policies that have been created. So we just have deny or any. That are just the default ones put in there. So I'm going to click on the policy, and we're going to create a new policy, and we're just going to put in anything we want here. So I'm just going to change this to accept, maybe change the service to BGP, and then just pop OK. Add it to the bottom. It's no good to us, so I'm going to move it up one more. Or just move that one down. There you go, that seemed to have done the trick. Once we're happy with it, we can save our work. Saving it allows us to come back at a later date and continue. Now it's important to know that no changes that you make here are actually pushed to the device until they're approved and installed. So once we're happy and we've made all the changes, we can submit it. We can send a message to the person that's going to be submitting or reviewing the changes. And now if we had the automation set up at this point, the person who actually approves the changes for the ADOM test 1 would get notified. So let's say we did. We got a notification, we're the admin, so we log on. And our customer within the ADOM test wants to make a change. We've had the notification, so we've logged in and we click on test 1. We're going to go across to the Policy and Objects tab. Now you'll notice that we can't see the changes here because none of them are approved. This is actually in life. This is in production. So what we're going to do is we're going to lock it. And then as soon as we lock it, you'll notice straight here we've had the change control. We need some information from Bob and the time and dates. And if we right click, we can view the changes that Bob's put forward. We can look at the details of the change that he's put forward. And we can download a copy, maybe for your records. And we have the option to approve, reject, or discard. I can approve it and send a message back saying this is fine, please install. Hit OK on that. And now that change control has been approved. And you can see again on the back is updated but yet to be installed. And if it's not installed, it's not on the device. So either I can install it using the install wizard and put it onto the device, or at this point Bob also has the ability to log in and install it himself. To review for the lesson, we talked about concurrent ADOM access and why it's a bad thing to not have any lock-in mechanism in place, because you can't stop other engineers from logging on and making changes at the same time as another. We've talked about the two different options that we have to combat this. We've talked about the workspace normal mode and the workflow. Normal introducing a lock-in mechanism, whereas the workflow introduces that lock-in mechanism and a way to approve, reject and audit the changes. We looked into actually configuring both workspaces, both normal and the workflow. We then went in with Bob and we created some changes and then went in with the admin to approve them. We went into the CLI and assigned the permissions that were required for Bob to make those changes within the FortiManager for them to be approved in the first place. And then we looked about assigning the approvers to the particular ADOM, allowing the admin user to approve the changes that Bob has put forward for his change control. I hope this lesson's been informative. I'd like to thank you for viewing, and if it has been, please do like and subscribe.